Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning and welcome to All Indiana Politics. I'm Garrett Bergquist in for Phil Sanchez. The crossroads of America found itself at the crossroads of religion and politics this past week. The Southern Baptist Convention held its annual meeting in Indianapolis. The SBC adopted a resolution against in vitro fertilization and narrowly defeated an amendment to the SBC Constitution to ban women pastors in that faith. Meanwhile, former Vice President and Indiana Governor Mike Pence spoke to a breakout session during the convention. He touched on abortion, the events of January 6th, and the upcoming election. Wish TV was the only TV station in the room for that conversation. Here's part of it.
Those who would say that the cause of abortion is now a states-only issue, that is not what the Supreme Court decided in the Dobbs decision, as the RLC knows, having championed that cause so much over the years. The Supreme Court returned the question of abortion rightly to the states and the American people. And I'm quick to remind people, the American people elect presidents, they elect senators, they elect congressmen, governors and state house representatives, and I think it is incumbent on us to call on men and women at every level of public life to advance the sanctity of life in the law of the land, federal, state, and local. But as you know, there are voices in our party that want to say it's just off to the states. But if you can go back about 150 years ago, and there was an effort to marginalize another issue that had to do with the personhood of people in this country. And for 20 years, a resolution of that was delayed until it would be tragically resolved because they marginalized it to the states instead of doing what William Wilberforce did in the United Kingdom in the 1820s. Where he said, as we should have said at the time, I would tell you, the question of abortion is not a state issue, it's a moral issue. Yes. And we need to stand for life at every level in this country. Well, I shared the concerns that millions had about irregularities in the election. I had hoped that when all was said and done, he would recognize that those that were telling him I had some authority to overturn the election were wrong. But it was not to be. But going into that day, we prayed all the way through it. We had decided that we were going to keep our oath. The Bible says in Psalm 15, he keeps his oath even when it hurts. I know something about that. You remember I was on the ballot. But doing our work that day, I must tell you, throughout all of it, through the riot that happened, and I was determined to stay at my post, which we did, stay at the Capitol, and finish the work that day. Been much reported about it over the last 3 years, and maybe be more written about it in the years ahead, but I will tell you that I've often told our children that the safest place in the world is to be in the center of God's will. And for my wife and I and my daughter, we were at the Capitol that day with devoted staff and other public officials. I felt peace. I knew we were where we were supposed to be, doing what we were supposed to be doing. And that was God's grace. And in the months and years that have followed, we've endured some criticism. My old running mate and I still have a very strong difference on my duties that day. And I don't know that that'll ever change. But traveling around the country, to answer your question, Brent, I've been deeply moved. I arrived at a small airport last year in Iowa, and I walked in with 2 campaign people with me, and somebody looked at me and said, "I thought you rolled deeper than this." I don't roll deep anymore.
You drove yourself here today by yourself. You just came on over.
So so people spot the white hair and they say, you know how much you look like Mike Pence? And I said, I tell people I get that every day. But honestly, I would say to you, while there are those, and I have great compassion on people that have been misled on this. I have great compassion on people that have been told something that isn't so. And I'll leave the judgment to history.
Wanted to know, what are the things that your congregations are talking to you about as a pastor, as an associate pastor, minister? The number two thing was the upcoming election. And I'm sure if we were doing a survey this year, it would now be the number one thing. It's on everyone's mind. This fall, we have an election that 70% of Americans, according to polls, did not want a rematch of 2020. Both nominees have historically high unfavorable ratings. The right track, wrong track number has been underwater now for years as it relates to the direction our country is in. We seem to have dug ourselves into a hole. How do we get out of this and get on a better trajectory?
Well, I honestly think, prayer. You know, if there ever was a time to go back to that pulpit and tell you folks, pray for America, it'd be now. I've been down to that border a bunch. I mean, it's the worst crisis on the southern border of the United States in the history of this country. And it's not going to get better anytime soon. Families are struggling. 20% inflation since this administration took office and launched a gusher of spending. We have war raging in Eastern Europe. We have people really in the streets of New York yesterday waving flags saying, remember October 7th. Let me tell you, if the world knows nothing else, the world should know this: America stands with Israel. But I would just encourage you to pray. And the other piece is one of the reasons I love ERLC. Because as you pray, and it's not a trivial statement, the effective and fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much, that this is the real stuff of faith. And it's been what's sustained this country throughout our history. The second thing is stand. I said before, Joe Biden, no. But making sure that the leadership of our party at every level stays on the track of what will result in a freer, more prosperous America that cherishes life, that cherishes family. There's some work to do there.
Coming up, a new law meant to block children's access to online adult content faces a court challenge. We explain why existing case law might work against it. Welcome back. A law requiring age verification for adult content websites is now under fire. One legal expert says this law is unenforceable under federal case law. News 8's Danielle Zolkowski explains the lawsuit.
This lawsuit says it's a free speech violation to require age verification for all websites, with more than 1/3 of its content considered harmful to minors.
The lawsuit, filed by a group of plaintiffs with stakes in the adult film industry, says the law passed by the Indiana legislature violates the Constitution and the 1996 Communications Decency Act.
And the Supreme Court decided more than 25 years ago that you couldn't require age verification online. And the reason was pretty simple, which is age verification is really hard to do online.
Adult film content is protected as free speech under the First Amendment.
How do you actually verify age with someone you can't see? And so usually we do that by collecting a lot of information about them.
Age verification is an expensive process. The cost burden would likely be on companies and consumers. There are also concerns about these websites having access to personal information.
Now we've got a big privacy issue. And interestingly, the state law prohibits you from saving that information. But of course, you have to save it to prove that you did it.
The suit names Indiana State Attorney General Todd Rokita because he will have to enforce the law. He shared a statement on social media. Children shouldn't be able to easily access explicit material that can cause them harm. It's common sense. We need to protect and shield them from the psychological and emotional consequences associated with viewing porn. We look forward to upholding our constitutional duty to defend this law in court.
We don't require that everybody else protect kids. What we require is that we build in through schools and community organizations and families the sense of education and training that we hope will help kids protect themselves.
Kate and the lawsuit point out that kids are now very computer literate and could likely get around age verification barriers.
This law is set to go into effect on July 1st. The group is asking for an injunction so this lawsuit can be settled before the law would potentially be enforced. I'm Danielle Zolkowski for Wish TV, wishtv.com, and follow us on Facebook for updates.
Coming up, Indiana's best political team tackles the new politics of IVF. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, Democrat Arielle Brandy and Republican Whitley Yates. Let's begin with the lawsuit we heard about in the last segment over Indiana's age verification law. Whitley, this has been a priority, particularly among Republicans across the country. If this lawsuit succeeds, does that end any effort to limit access to online adult content?
I'm not going to say that it completely ends it, but it's definitely a step, I think, in the right direction. The truth is that we don't want our children to have access to any sexually explicit or pornographic material. I mean, that to me, that statement to me should just be across the board accepted. And I think anything that we're attempting to do as a state and as legislators and leaders should be done in the protection of our children.
Arielle, how likely is it the age verification law survives this challenge in some form?
I mean, I think the only issue is, and I agree completely with Whitley, it's all about protecting our children and making sure that they don't have access to these types of things. I think the issue that we run into is obviously when we look at the First Amendment laws and being able to have freedom of speech to be able to access these kinds of things, I think that's where we kind of have to thread the needle. But like, how do we also properly verify someone's age when you can't really do it in a very good way, I would think, online? Is it submitting personal information, your ID? I mean, I would love to be able to see more around how this has worked in other states and if this is something we need to move forward with. But ultimately, it is, for the protection of our children. So I am in agreement with that.
Let's turn to the politics of religion. At the Southern Baptist Convention annual meeting here in Indy, the SBC adopted a resolution that condemns a number of practices associated with in vitro fertilization. Now, they stopped short of calling for an outright ban. Arielle, are we seeing a new front develop in the battle over reproductive rights?
Absolutely. We are seeing it all the way from IVF to access to birth control and contraceptives. I mean, this is just a straight up attack on reproductive freedoms, not only just in the state of Indiana, but in our country. If we know that these medical procedures have been safe and legal and have got us this far, we need to continue with them. People have the right to be able to make decisions, not only just about their bodies, but about starting their own families as well.
Whitley, the SBC is America's largest Protestant denomination and is heavily Republican. How much do you think that resolution will influence other evangelicals within the party?
I'm not sure about how this will really influence them, but I don't think that we should be surprised that, like you said, the largest group of Protestants are the ones who are voting in this way or making these types of declarations. They have the religious freedom to like what they like, to dislike the things that they dislike. And so I don't think it's for us to chastise their belief system. It's for us to really understand where they're coming from. Now, when that belief system begins to trickle down into our policies is when we need to really have a deeper conversation. But for them to feel this way and to vote on things that they believe are in alignment with their religious freedoms, I think is fine.
Staying on that topic for just a moment, you might recall the Alabama legislature passed a law to protect IVF after the Alabama Supreme Court ruling early this year. Does that give us a little bit of a better barometer, in your opinions, as to where Republican lawmakers and the country generally are on this? And Whitley, you can go first on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I would say anytime we're attempting to protect, preserve, and have prosperous life, not only in Indiana, but around this nation, then you're going to see Republicans supporting that always and in all ways. I think a lot of times the issues or the delineation, I guess, on how we do that comes into play. But seeing what happened in Alabama, I think it may be an omen to other Republican states that they will follow along suit.
Arielle, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think we are going to see an uprise in this all across the country, but also in our state specifically. I mean, we've seen it kind of creeping into our legislation already, and so I don't think we'll be far off from it. What I would encourage us to do, especially as Hoosiers who are looking to start families, wanting to make our own choices about this, standing up against legislators having a say in these types of policies. It is your decision to make, not only with your doctor, but with your partner, even with yourself. If you are trying to be able to start a family on your own, whatever that may be, it needs to be a decision that is made by you, whether it is through IVF or you being able to conceive on your own or making the decision not to. That should ultimately be up to us as our own selves and not to legislators to be able to govern that.
Shifting gears, Hunter Biden was found guilty of 3 felonies in his federal gun trial. And of course, he does face additional charges in a separate case. Arielle, does this conviction undercut Republicans' claims the justice system is rigged against them?
I don't think that it does. I mean, are people really still paying attention to what's happening with Hunter Biden right now with all that's going on in this country? I think we have to make a shift at kind of like the personal attacks against, policymakers and their families right now and really focus on what's going on in this country, which I know the next topic we're going to talk about is one that I'm most focused on as we're looking forward to the presidential election that's happening right now. And I can tell you right now, Hunter Biden is not on the top of my list of concerns as we're looking at what's happening in this country.
Whitley, I'll let you respond as well.
Oh, good old Hunter. I am glad that the criminal justice system had due process and that he was tried by a jury of his peers. However, as someone who is pro-Second Amendment, I don't necessarily know how constitutional that question on that form is. Now, I'm not someone who is going to carry Hunter Biden's water or his laptop, but what I will say is as someone who advocates for the Second Amendment, I don't necessarily know if that question actually infringes on his right that says it shall not be infringed. So while I am a two-way advocate and I support it, I'm not going to carry his water. I am happy that he has finally been found guilty of something because we've seen a list of the many felonious activities that he's been involved in. But when it comes to the Second Amendment, I think that we're walking on a tightrope, and I'm not sure we should necessarily be celebrating this in the way that Republicans and other two-way advocates have been.
The UN Security Council approved a Gaza ceasefire resolution backed by the Biden administration. The administration claims Israel has accepted it, and Hamas says it's ready to work with mediators. Whitley, we've got about 90 seconds left. Is this a foreign policy win for the Biden administration?
I think it has the potential to be a foreign policy win if both sides actually agree and adhere to the agreement, and that this could be something that is a win, for him, because the progressives have been wanting to see this for a long time. I feel like when it comes to sticking by our allies and sticking by Israel, if this is something that they want, then I think that it's good all around.
Arielle, from what we've seen over the past few months, is this plan going to work?
I mean, I would hope that it does. I mean, it's been a while since we've been able to see any kind of resolution around this issue. And if this is the path forward, then I hope that we can make some moves towards getting that done. I mean, it's unfortunate that we've seen so many lives lost in Gaza at the hands of us not being able to make a decision on this earlier and pushing for not only the Biden administration, but for other countries to come and rally around the fact that we have been complicit to some things that, we need to be able to stand behind. And I think that hopefully this is the path forward that we need. But ultimately, I don't know if this is going to be, exactly the ultimate answer that exactly the left or the progressive side has been looking for.
Arielle and Whitley, thanks for joining us. Great conversation as always, and we will be right back. Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. And be sure to tune in at 11 for The Hill Sunday with Chris Steyerwalt. Have a great rest of your weekend.